Everyone, my name is Tatiana Kovalsky and I'm going to be presenting my research on Title IX and sexual misconduct policies across college campuses, finding out where they vary and what would make a comprehensive policy. Before we begin, I do want to give a trigger warning that this presentation does contain information on sexual violence that could be triggering to some audiences. Please practice self-care and feel free to either mute this presentation or click out of it at any point throughout. So we've all heard about sexual violence, and maybe we have heard some statistics being thrown around, but maybe some of you have been left with the question, how prevalent is it really? I've pulled these statistics to show you that every 73 seconds, an American is sexually assaulted. 1 in 5 women and 1 in 16 men are sexually assaulted, and that perhaps most alarmingly, more than 90% of sexual assault victims on college campuses are not reporting their assaults. Sexual misconduct is against the law, and if college campuses are tackling such a prevalent and dangerous issue, policies are essentially the highest level of intervention possible and thusly need to be ultimately comprehensive. They are essentially the foundation of the campus environment. I decided to take a closer dive into the policies at the Patriot League University institutions, which are some of Boston University's peer institutions. I excluded the Army and the Navy from this presentation of my data because I wanted to make sure that I was comparing Boston University to its peer institutions, and the Army and the Navy had too many structural differences that made them less comparable to the rest for the purpose of this comparative research. When diving into each of these schools' policies, I noticed 4 major components that I separated out, which I laid out in front of you. Namely, whether the institution has a crisis center, definitions found in their policies, reporting procedures, and prevention measures listed. When we think about an issue at an institution this large, I decided to kind of take a closer look and cut it down into all these 4 different sections. I decided to take a look at crisis centers to notice that only 4 of the 8 institutions actually have a crisis center dedicated solely to the issue of helping survivors in a confidential way. I then took a closer look to note whether the 4 centers offered aids including counseling, a 24/7 hotline, prevention work, and/or knowledge of rights and advocacy for survivors. I noted in my research, for instance, that only 2 of the 4 that did have centers offered counseling, and that only 2 of the 4 of these centers offered a 24/7 hotline, both of which could be greatly helpful for survivors. In this next slide, I took a look at definitions and what terms the institutions did or did not define within their policy. To the left, you'll see a table noting that only 5 of the 8 schools define the word rape within their policy. Similarly, I took a look at many other terms, some listed here to the right, to see what was and what was not defined. An example I found within my research is that some of the institutions group domestic, relational, and dating violence together without properly delineating any key differences. This could be an issue when it comes to the reporting and adjudication procedures, which should delineate what exactly is prohibited within their policy and have clear definitions on what is and what is not allowed. Here we can see that some universities' policies do not have some of the key definitions listed within their policies. In this slide, we're looking at the reporting process, seeing that only 4 of the 8 universities have the rights of the person reporting listed out within their policy. Only 1 of the 8 have policy listed on what to do if you're a victim at the university's abroad programs, and only 4 of the 8 have an amnesty policy on drugs and alcohol, saying that you will not face repercussions for being under the influence if you have come forward about an assault. So few college students are reporting, and these are just some of the few potential barriers as to why. In this next slide, we're looking at prevention, and we're seeing that only 6 of the 8 have it listed within their policy that first-year students have a mandatory prevention education workshop, which is mandatory to complete. The other 2 did not mention this clearly being mandated, even though it is federally mandated under the Clery Act. I also took a look to see if prevention policies included continuous prevention work in person, and resources for higher risk minority populations like LGBTQ students who are at a higher risk statistically for sexual violence. I found, for instance, that almost none of the institutions require continuous mandatory in-person prevention work. In conclusion, Title IX gives us the bare minimum, and clearly our statistics show room for improvement in how many people are affected by sexual misconduct at colleges. And these are areas for improvement that could bolster policy and make campuses safer because students clearly remain at risk. Here's a recap of some of the gaps I found between policies that potentially could bolster and help make college campuses safer. Of course, more research must be done, but these are variations within the policies that could help make policies more comprehensive and make the campuses safer. So, for instance, 24/7 access to a gender-based violence response office through a hotline with counselors to help survivors through their trauma could be of great benefit to college campuses. Being more transparent about exactly what is and what is not prohibited at the policy level, with definitions for key terms throughout every single policy, with sanctions for violating each in order to make the process clearer and more standardized. Lessening the barriers to reporting through efforts like promised amnesty, published survivors' rights, and standardized trauma-informed training for adjudication personnel. And lastly, effective prevention education is a key must. Research shows that single sessions are not enough, and therefore schools should require continuous, comprehensive, in-person prevention education for everyone on campus that is skill-based rather than passive. These are just some ways in which the policies have varied and how institutions could close those gaps and make their policies more comprehensive to make our campuses safer and tackle this dangerous issue. I wanted to say a huge thank you to my advisor, Dr. Lipson, for her ongoing support throughout this project, Professor Masiki, the Kilachand Honors College, our live audience today, and Boston University for all your help in making this research a reality. Thank you, everyone, and that's the end of my presentation.